Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersmen, a YouTube channel about all things Trek with a heavy focus on the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. Today is the final of the 3 Division books, some of the earliest source books to be released for Star Trek Adventures. We are finally covering the Sciences Division today in a quick review. So as usual for any of our reviews, we're using the alert system. Yellow for things to keep an eye on, red alert for things that we really like, and black alert for things that are completely game-changing, groundbreaking. So without further ado, let me jump into the small window and let's continue our review. Let's just start it. Not even continue it. Let's start the review. So where are we? Sciences Division. It's if you watch the reviews for the Command Division and the Operations Division, it's laid out in the very exact same way. So you're starting with Chapter 1, which is just a very basic introduction of what you're going to find in the book. It will break down chapter by chapter, so not much to say there. Diving into Chapter 2, and I believe Chapter 3, these are the chapters that are designed for the players, more or less. They are going to explain, Chapter 2 at least, is going to explain what the Sciences Division is, so you can understand it. So Chapter 2 is called Science Division or Sciences Division. It's a brief overview of both the sciences and the medical divisions, including their history in Starfleet. So where they started even before Starfleet became Starfleet. It'll go through the whole history of the organization. You get into the exploratory division, and it talks about the various kinds of missions that you can go on, exploration missions, survey missions. It gives you the protocols for such missions, including first contact protocols, scientific mystery protocols, lost starship protocols, temporal missions. So of course science, it's going to deal a lot with time travel, temporal missions that pops up frequently through this book. So you're going to get a lot of flavor for what it's like to be in the Sciences Division in this chapter. It then goes into Starfleet science, and it has like it'll break down what different science missions look like going on surveys, working on the science vessel, outposts, the different technologies, or evaluating brand new experimental technologies. And it briefly covers some of the scientific institutes that are big in Star Trek, especially the Daystrom Institute and some other institutions from different polities in Star Trek. Continuing in the same chapter, Chapter 2, it moves on, of course, to medical, because medical is part of the Sciences Division, and you get, I think, well, I'll come back to that in a second. First, in this section about medical, it will say what the job of a Chief Medical Officer, or CMO, is, and what the responsibilities are. It talks about the ethics of medicine in Starfleet and the basis of Starfleet ethics, or Starfleet medical ethics, I should say. And it will run down, of course, just like the sciences, what medical missions look like, and also difficulties of what medical interference might look like in applying to other cultures that your Starfleet crew might be visiting. One little note I saw on my paper that I want to give a yellow alert to is I think there's a really good sidebar on page 24. It's also in the usual form, especially these early books, of a personal log entry. This one is the entry of a CMO who is relieving the captain from duty. As you see in Star Trek a lot, or maybe not a lot, but there are occasions where the Chief Medical Officer, one of their responsibilities is to relieve the captain or the commanding officer if they are no longer fit for duty for one reason or another. This log is really interesting, and I think it's good for Chief Medical Officer players to read, to really get them in the mindset of something that might happen in the interpersonal drama that could play out because of that. Really great for RP setting. But it's a really good personal log, page 24. Just wanted to point that out because I thought that was really cool. I think the last part in Chapter 2 Just also goes into Starfleet Academy and the sciences at Starfleet Academy and what it would be like as a cadet in Starfleet Academy and the course you would take or the branches that you would go when you're in the sciences division. That's chapter 2. Chapter 3 is Science Division characters. Again, this is also a character aimed chapter. So you'll get about the science schools, the ideas where your character may have graduated from. It doesn't have to be Starfleet Academy. There's a whole variety of science schools and medical schools out there that your character might have attended instead of Starfleet Academy. So you could use this as inspiration for building your character. And there's also the sidebar about creating science characters. So you'll have different educational choices. You'll have advice for building them, what kind of stats to use, what kind of focuses to use. There's a breakdown of, just like in the previous books in this series, the score. So science is probably your top score, or medicine is probably your top score. What does it mean if your second highest score is command or your second highest score is con? What that really shows to you, and also the different levels. What level 5 in medicine represents as a character as opposed to level 4, and so on. There's also, same as the other books, a brand new list of focuses and talents to give you ideas of how you could customize your character better. A lot of this, of course, is in, not a lot of this, all of this is in BC Holmes' great online character creator that I talk about in almost every other video, feels like. And also a lot of this stuff has appeared in later source books as they've been released, or later releases, I should say, as they've been released. But again, we're talking about one of the very early things in Star Trek Adventures. So back then this was new, and also it's nice to have a reference all in one place. If you want to go for medical stuff or science stuff, you have this book here. But again, this isn't something that's only contained here. You will find it elsewhere. And of course, the character creator is always going to be a helpful choice. After you get through the sciences section, it goes right into the medical section, which is the exact same setup. Tells you how to build the character, what it's like to have this as your second highest score aside from medicine, what the different levels in your skill means, the ranks in your skills mean. So same exact thing. There's also a very interesting sidebar about genetic enhancements and cybernetic enhancements, and we see that a lot more often, especially in Star Trek Discovery. So it talks about the different kind of abilities and talents or other kind of traits that you would gain from having these sorts of augments to your body. So let's move ahead to chapter 4. So chapter 4, this is the research and development chapter, and of course it's going to talk about medical equipment. So if you're playing a science officer, or especially a medical officer, you could go in and read up on what a lot of this equipment means, like biobeds, cortical scanners, what else, like temporary hollow organs. That's interesting. So again, great resource to go and dig into the nitty gritty, the technical details that if you're not really science inclined or medically, I guess that's a word, inclined, you could go here. This book, great reference. I think even more so than command and operations, because there seems to be a lot of players who feel like they're not adequate in their knowledge of sciences and medicine. So it's nice to have this handbook with you that you could just flip through, find ideas, find words to use, find equipment to use, and call out. So I really love the sciences book for that. Moving on, still in this section, it also talks about the different kind of drugs that are used in medicine in Star Trek. Not just what they are, but what they do. So you get more than the name, you get actually what they are used for. Again, this can inform your roleplay, give you ideas on what to do as a character in the scene, especially if you're a chief medical officer. There's a section on unusual life forms. Unusual life forms, so about the really, truly alien life forms, the ones that are not similar. They are not just humans with funny bumps on their foreheads. These are like the really, really alien life forms, spaceborne life forms, non-corporeal life forms, and it gives you stats for some NPCs that fit this description, such as the Organians and so on. I don't have to rattle off that list. Finally, you have scientific mysteries, which is pretty interesting. So there's a little section that gives you some flavor, and maybe world building ideas would be a good way of describing it, to describe information on parallel universes, psychic powers, the evolution, ascensions, subspace corridors, subspace rifts, and also a sidebar about using real life science. So the opposite of what I just said, if you're a player who is scientifically inclined, or you are medically inclined, and you do have that kind of knowledge, you do have that kind of background, there's a little sidebar there that tells you and also GM of how to use real life science, real world science into the game, instead of just making up techno babble or medical babble just to brush away what you're trying to say. You could actually use real world science in it. So a nice piece of advice in there, and I'm glad they included it. I don't know if I would need it, because I think I'm more of the techno babble kind than cold hard real science kind. But anyhow, that was good. Next section, I am going to give Red Alert. This section in chapter 4 is all about the Q continuum. We're talking about scientific mysteries, things that science still can't explain. The Q continuum certainly fits inside that. It is an unusual life form, and it's a mystery. So detail about what we know about the Q continuum from the TV series, the various TV series, what they are, how they're structured, what they are like. And the best part is the advice on how you should run games when you include a Q, because Q's basically God. They have godlike powers, they have godlike level of control. It's not like you're going to thwart them easily. So if you're putting them in the game, there's almost no point unless you have an aim, a reason for them to be there. This section in this chapter gives you, as a game master, a lot of advice on how to incorporate the Q successfully into a game and not make it look like the players can do nothing. Really good chapter, really important part, and I think a lot of players, a lot of Star Trek fans want to use the Q sometime, somehow. Stand down, Red Alert. Last part in this chapter is about time travel. So, of course, mysteries, scientific mysteries. You gotta talk about time travel. We already talked about parallel universes. Might as well talk about time travel. Has advice on how to incorporate that into the game, how to use time travel, the methods of time travel that we see throughout Star Trek, how that could be replicated in your game. And of course, you can't have time travel if you, did I say travel with a B? You can't have time travel if you don't talk about the Department of Temporal Investigations. Really cool little side group in Star Trek, and the fun thing to incorporate if you're having time travel in your game. That's chapter 4. Chapter 5 is straight up 100% GM's chapter. This is your information using the Sciences Division. So using the Sciences Division, of course, it's going to tell you how to make science-based storylines. And just like in Command and Operations Division, same thing here. It utilizes the red, blue, and I was going to say red, white, and blue. Hey, how patriotic. The red, blue, and gold components with the random tables if you want to roll for it. So it breaks down like red is for your diplomacy, intrigue, political stories. Gold is combat. What else? Physical action, espionage. Blue, science and medical, of course. And the various types of storylines that fit within those. So if you roll one up or you just flip through there, it'll describe what that looks like in light of a science episode, in light of a medical episode, but you're doing a red component, you're doing a gold component, or you're doing a straight up science with a blue component. But the different types of story, the different types of encounters you could have based on those, I guess, component plot I can do this. Plot component types. Too many T's in there, I think. Continue on. Yeah, it goes from science to medical division, so it just copies the same pattern, but explains it in a medical slanted storyline. Then you get another interesting one, and I think I'm giving this a yellow alert as well. Spatial and planetary phenomena. This is more detail, again, especially helpful for those who are not very scientifically inclined or don't really know much about the science behind the astrophysics out there. Nebulas, novas, supernovas, iron storms, black holes, pulsars, and more. This goes into a lot greater detail than what you got in the core book, gives you ideas how to use it, how it would affect the ship in the game if you encounter those, and just different ways that you could take inspiration to use these scientific elements, these hazards in your stories. So I really, really like this part of chapter 5. Next is a really good section. I could give it a yellow, but I think it's just natural that it fits here because it's part of the department. Counselors, ship counselors. So it talks about how to use and how to play as a ship's counselor in the game, and it gives you examples. It also talks about how to consider that some of the content that a ship's counselor would be used for could be sensitive and traumatic for players in the real world as well. So it gives you advice on how to be careful, how to be respectful and delicate when you are using ship's counselors in the game, and also what those situations which really demands their duties might call for, and how they might affect the players in the real world. Some really important stuff to keep in mind, but just overall advice on how to play a ship's counselor, what it means to be a ship's counselor, and also explaining how the position grew in Starfleet, why we don't really see it in the original series, and what kind of led to them becoming a more standard and acceptable part of a Federation starship or station that you see them everywhere. After that, you have a section about creating aliens, creating your own aliens, and it gets into, you know what, I am giving this a yellow alert because I found it very cool. So it gets into like literally the science behind creating aliens, and it'll break down like what type of a star is the system. So what is the star? What, there's various kinds of stars. There's like the like red giants, there's the blues, there's the yellow. It'll talk about the different types of stars and how this affects planets. Then you go into the actual planet. What type of planet is it? What is the planetary type? How habitable is it? What is the topography? What is the climate? And how these elements would determine the kind of life that forms on that planet. It is really good detail. It's not just like, oh, give him some antenna, give him crazy legs. This is talking about how this type of star would affect the planet and how this type of planet would affect the organisms growing on it. Really, really good stuff. Yeah, it deserves a yellow alert at the bare minimum. But also there's random tables that you can use to decide like the various types of life, the various type of environment on the planet, culture, and so on. It goes into a lot of detail. Really, really like that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely deserves a yellow alert on that. Finally, hostile environments and hazards. On this final part of chapter 5 talks about like atmospheric conditions. I am having so much trouble tonight. Atmospheric conditions, gravity. Another thing I'm giving a yellow alert to, the like biological hazards, like diseases, outbreaks, plagues. I use this when I did my episode about an infectious disease for my group. I went right to this part of the sciences division. I read through it. I got a ton of ideas, got a great way of how to incorporate my particular disease idea into the game mechanically and story-wise. Really great. It's a sidebar in there that talks about these biological hazards. Really, really good. Especially if you're dealing with medical stuff, but you could apply this for any type of biological hazard. Also, chapter weather, all sorts of phenomena, all sorts of dangers, hazards that you would encounter in a scientific style way. That's not an enemy. It's something created by the environment, by the natural world. That's the end of chapter 5. Great resource for the GM. great information for using good hard science in your games, especially if you don't have that background. This gives you what you need, and anything you don't know, you could just wave away with technobabble or just very broad explanations. You don't have to be a scientist to run any of this, or Star Trek in general. Last chapter, let's do it. Chapter 6, Science Personnel, or Sciences Personnel. This is, of course, the NPCs. You start out with like well-known characters, well-known NPCs like the luminaries of the science and medical world. Dr. Richard Daystrom, Dr. Carol Marcus, Dr. Louis Zimmerman, Noonien Sung, he's also a doctor. Everyone's a doctor. It's like the Oprah thing. So you get a lot of the big name medical and science people in Star Trek to use if you want to use them as NPCs in your game. That's followed by more generic NPCs, generic scientists, generic medical professionals, surgeons, and whatnot. Then also Starfleet personnel, like the scientists and the medical personnel who work in Starfleet. So you'll get like astrocartographers, counselors, physicians, and so on. That, like, you could just flip through, choose the NPC you want. And just like in the previous department or division source books, it also has a section of pre-made supporting characters that you could just pull out if you need that type of science character to play as a supporting character instead of rolling it up. Or again, using the wonderful BC Holmes character creator, you could just come right to this part in the chapter and look it up. And that is it. That might be a record for me. So yeah, the Sciences Division, it's straightforward. If you know Command Division, if you know Operations Division, this follows the exact same pattern. It encourages you to use science, hard science, real actual phenomena in your game, because it gives you the information you need. It tells you how to use it. It tells you how to incorporate it. It holds your hand. It will let you confidently run those types of stories. I've done it many times. I love science, but I can't say I can whip up a good science story off the top of my head. I come to this book when I need that information. Plus, time travel, Q continuum, that's awesome stuff. If you need to know medical terminology, the equipment, the drugs, the things that you see used in Star Trek, come right here. You get a lot of that stuff. Great resource. Now that I'm done with all three of these classic original source books, I would say that probably the Science Division one is my favorite source book for just pure material, pure content to make my games from. I love the other two, and especially the Technobabble chart in the Operations Division. But as a resource, I think this is my most used resource book. I refer to it quite frequently when I have to do science things. Other elements I can pull off the top of my head. This is a great one for me to get something more accurate, and the detail really shows in here. And that's it. That is the Sciences Division Supplement Review. Highly recommend it. I know a lot of these old books are now becoming outdated. It's 6, 7, 8 years since the debut of Star Trek Adventures. A lot of this content has been reprinted elsewhere. A lot of this content has been updated and made a little more fitting for what the game has grown into over the years. But there's still so much you could get from this book and the other two Division books. Still recommend keeping them on your shelves. There's a lot you can pull from it. Love it. Sciences Division book. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay safe out there, my friends. Live long and prosper. Peace and long life. See you next time.